Today we have author and contemporary mystic Gary Layman in our studio to share some of his insights from his new book, I Am Light, The Prodigal Path and Beyond. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you very much, John.
And Gary, could you give our listeners some brief biographical insight into your life and how you came to the life of a practical mystic, and finally what compelled you to write and put it in book form?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'm a product of the American experience, like anybody else. I'm not I'm not some guy that's been dropped off the spaceship from some distant planet, so to speak, and speaking in very bizarre terms. What I'd like to do is define what a mystic is, maybe to begin with, and then I'll go back just a little bit. A mystic is somebody who's essentially just in touch with what we would call the source or the inner voice. But I started like many of us have, and many of our listeners will relate to this. I grew up in the post-World War era during the 50s and 60s. The American dream was everybody's goal at that time. People weren't thinking quite like they are today. They weren't questioning quite as much. Today, people are beginning to really question themselves at a very, very deep level. Back in those days, everybody just kind of bought the cultural myth, hook, line, and sinker, because it was what our parents did. Now people are really beginning to ask very profound and deep questions, which are those mystical questions that seekers always ask, such as, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And who or what is in charge? And those are the profoundest questions any conscious being can ask. And I began to ask those questions of myself about 30 years ago. And what I've tried to do in my book is describe that story, which essentially is the story of the parable of the prodigal son, which is a scriptural reference, but you don't necessarily have to be religiously focused to understand that. Most of us feel at one time or another that we're kind of lost and strangers in a strange land. And when I began to ask those questions and at a very profound level of discontent many years ago, all of a sudden I began to have a cascading series of experiences that led to what I'll call a mystical awakening. And I talk about those things in my book and try to help my readers discover where they're at on their own path so that they can move forward consciously and not feel quite so lost in the world.
And so what actual things or practices did you actually do to, for lack of a better word, turn your life around?
Okay, that's a great beginning question. What I had to do initially, I had a great deal of anger at the time and a sense of wounding, and I'll call it just cultural victimization. I had been involuntarily drafted during the Vietnam conflict, and back when there was a real draft where the government could own you for a period of time.
I remember that.
I went through a divorce as a result of that. Everybody's heard of Dear John letters. Well, it's real. Believe me, I can tell you.
Oh, wow.
When a young man or a young woman is overseas and estranged from their family and culture, and you get a letter like that, that compounded my misery. I'll just put it that way. So I came back, and even though I re-entered my profession, which was teaching, I still had this sense of disconnect and disillusionment, and eventually went through a divorce and basically just cried out to the universe for answers. And although the law of attraction wasn't being talked about at that point, what I had done, I had unconsciously initiated the law of attraction, and because I cried out for help, I began to have a series of experiences. And one of the first things that happened was I realized I needed to heal my wounded emotional nature. And that led to what I'll just call kind of an inner child healing experience that led to more deeper healing experiences. So one of the things I do in my book is help people identify those wounded parts of themselves as I had previously encountered, so that people could consciously learn how to heal those parts of themselves. And frankly, that doesn't always happen in a clinical situation with traditional counseling.
Right.
A lot of times traditional counseling has a lot to do about talking and telling your story, which is okay and kind of opens the door to healing, but if people don't heal at a deep emotional level beyond the chatter of the intellect, healing is not deeply experienced. So that's one of the first things I do in my book, is help people get in touch with their sense of woundedness, estrangement, disillusionment, whatever that may be. And there are lots of tools out there in the culture for doing that. I try to give people specific, simple entry points to their own inner life so they can heal from the inside out without necessarily having to go to an external expert or authority figure to do that.
And that's a great term you use, entry point into their own life, so that they can heal from the inside out. And one of those tools is to do that with is meditation, correct?
That's very true. Over the last several decades, people, and not only people in the common pop culture talk about this, like on Oprah Winfrey or Larry King or whatever, talked about the importance of inner healing. Even the clinical medical community, MDs and the psychological community that deals with psychiatric well-being, acknowledge that stress, capital S, stress, is a causative factor in not only mental health but physical well-being also. And what stress is about is the stuff of the mind. We all know about the placebo effect and the fact that it's possible to drill a hole in your stomach through stress, and we call that ulcers. And we have also come to the point in clinical science, and it's very common knowledge these days, that the mind can affect the body and also our emotional well-being and so forth. So what I like to do is give people those entry point tools of taking charge of their life, so that no longer do we feel like victims of circumstances. So that's the beginning entry point on this mystical journey of returning to wholeness and well-being, regardless of what religious practice you come from, or maybe lack thereof. You may be an atheist or an agnostic. The universe works through principled order and law. I'll just put it that way. There are laws of consciousness that affect everything we're involved with.
And so if someone has something specific, because many times people either have just a general feeling of dis-ease, or uncomfortableness or stress or whatever it is, or they have some specific area in their life that they just can't, get over the hump on. Maybe their career, maybe finances, maybe their marriage or family or relationships in general. But for people looking for either some unknown relief or some specific area of relief, you can actually show them and guide them with help them to understand what meditation is and how they can use it so that they can open up these areas of their life.
Absolutely, and I'm not the only practitioner of this. There are many wonderful teachers and references out there. What I try to do, Don, is give people a very simple, basic approach that is not complicated or overly intellectual, that takes people years and years or months and months to accomplish. And, for example, I think most all of us could agree that we feel at peace, we feel in joy, and we love the beauty of the experience of nature. That's a very simple example of how, when we refocus our attention and many times location, it creates almost an immediate effect. In fact, that's why a lot of us enjoy good movies or travel logs and things like this, because it visually and in an auditory sense, if you add a little music, takes us out of where we have been, which is in our own minds, to another, literally to another location within our own consciousness, and we immediately feel better.
I like that. I feel better already just thinking about that.
Yeah. One of the simplest things we can do is activate what I call the beauty path. We all love things that are beautiful and graceful and easy to be around. And all cultures participate in that archetypal beauty ethic, whether you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian or an agnostic. Everybody loves to go to Hawaii, for example, or everybody loves an aromatic bouquet of flowers. That's the simplest example I can give. And for the practitioner of contemplative meditation, we can actually create those states of wholeness and reflective well-being by simply using beauty.